I just think, just trying to be more consistent. Glad a couple threes went in tonight.
Yeah, like Maddie said, we just try to get win tonight and try.
The February rain drummed relentlessly against the cracked windshield of the old Honda Civic as Caitlin Clark pulled into the nearly deserted grocery store car park at close to 11 o'clock. Her muscles aching from 3 punishing hours of conditioning drills and scrimmages. Her only intention to pick up some milk before heading back to her warm flat and collapsing into bed. Yet what made her stop mid-stride wasn't the cold, the rain, or the exhaustion clinging to her bones, but the sight of a battered car parked 3 spaces down, its fogged windows glowing faintly beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, and inside it the silhouette of a young woman gently rocking a crying infant while tears streamed silently down her face, surrounded by black garbage bags stuffed with everything they clearly owned. It felt impossible to Caitlin that in a world where millions drifted to sleep in safety and warmth each night, a mother and her newborn child were huddled together inside a freezing vehicle, relying on nothing but their bond and the fragile hope that tomorrow might hold more mercy than today. As she stood in the cold rain listening to the tiny muffled wails, Caitlin felt the familiar war inside her. The logical voice reminding her that she was a public figure, that getting involved with strangers carried risks, that perhaps she was misreading the situation, pitted against the deeper instinct she'd carried since childhood, shaped by parents who taught her that privilege meant responsibility and compassion was not optional. Something about the scene gripped her. The baby's small hand pressing weakly against the misted glass, the mother's trembling shoulders, the unmistakable desperation of someone trying to stay invisible and failing. The woman in the car was 24-year-old Sarah Chun, though Caitlin wouldn't learn her name until much later. For 6 long weeks, Sarah had been living in that 2003 Honda Civic with her 3-month-old daughter Emma, ever since being evicted from her tiny studio flat after falling behind on rent when she lost her job at a call center. Her life, which had once seemed mapped out with promise and stability, had crumbled with terrifying speed. She had been only 2 semesters away from completing her degree in early childhood education when an unplanned pregnancy and the baby's father's abrupt disappearance derailed everything she had built. Sarah had tried desperately to stay afloat, juggling classes, work shifts, rising medical costs, and sleepless nights, but reality had been unkind. She dropped out shortly before Emma's birth and slipped into the type of financial freefall that traps thousands of young mothers each year. She had applied to every assistance program she could. The waiting lists stretched for months. She phoned relatives who offered sympathy but no practical help. She went to job interviews she could barely afford the fuel to reach, only to be turned away with polite, weary rejection. The shelters in Indianapolis were overcrowded, many refusing infants for safety reasons. And Sarah, terrified by the stories she'd heard from other struggling mothers, feared involving child services in case they interpreted her situation as neglect. So she survived day by day, parking in a different location each night to avoid police attention, washing in public restrooms, rationing nappies and formula with painful precision, and using every blanket she owned to keep Emma warm after the car's heater failed 2 weeks earlier. The constant dampness had seeped into the upholstery, into their clothes, into Sarah's bones, and she suspected the persistent sniffle in Emma's tiny breaths meant a cold was coming. That night, Sarah had been sitting in the supermarket car parked for more than 2 hours, gathering the courage to walk inside and ask if they were hiring. Even though she knew her unwashed hair, sleepless eyes, and wrinkled clothes would likely cause the manager to dismiss her before she even finished her sentence. Her last $20 had gone towards formula and nappies, leaving her with no petrol, no food for herself, and no clear idea where they would sleep once the rain grew heavier. As Caitlin watched from a distance, she felt anger rise. Not at Sarah, but at a world where someone had fallen this far unnoticed. The rain ran cold down her neck, soaking her hoodie, and still she didn't move. She thought of her own family, of nights when her father had been unemployed, when meals were stretched thinner than anyone admitted, of the quiet resilience her parents modeled as they protected their children from adult burdens. She thought of the countless supporters who called her a hero on the basketball court, unaware that the real heroes were people like the woman in that car surviving battles far fiercer than anything she faced in the WNBA. Caitlin slowly approached the Civic, hands slightly raised to show she meant no harm, and lightly tapped on the fogged window. Inside, Sarah startled fear, shame and exhaustion flashing across her face, before lowering the window just a few centimeters as the cold air rushed inside and the baby whimpered. Caitlin offered a gentle smile and said softly that she didn't want anything. She had simply noticed they looked cold and asked if they were all right. Sarah's voice broke as she tried to say she was fine, that everything was under control, but the facade collapsed almost immediately. Years of swallowed pride spilled out in trembling sentences about the lost job, the eviction, the cold nights, the fear of being judged, the terror of failing her baby. Emma's tiny fist clutched at the air, her cry thin and tired, and something inside Caitlin clicked with absolute clarity. She knew she couldn't walk away, not tonight, not from this. The rain continued falling, indifferent and relentless, but for the three of them, something shifted in that moment, something small but silent.
So that was the mentality going in. Obviously, without Reek tonight, we kind of knew it was going to be step up by committee. But obviously, it feels good when shots go in.
Caitlin approached the car carefully, not wanting to startle Sarah or make her feel threatened. And when she tapped lightly on the driver's side window, Sarah looked up with eyes wide from fear, exhaustion, and the instinctive dread of someone used to being told to move along. She cracked the window only a fraction, expecting a security guard or police officer, but instead met a soft voice saying, "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you, but I saw you and your baby and wanted to make sure you're safe. Do you need any help?" Sarah hesitated, trying to steady her voice as she offered the automatic reply of someone who had learned that asking for help often leads to consequences. "We're fine." But Caitlin could see the truth in the trembling of her hands, in the hollow tone of a mother who had not slept properly in weeks, and she crouched down to eye level, gently asking when they had last eaten a hot meal or slept somewhere safe. That question cracked open the last of Sarah's fragile defenses, and tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered that it had been 3 days, that she and her 3-month-old daughter Emma had been living in the car for 6 weeks after she lost her job and then her flat, that she had nowhere else to go and no one left to ask for help. It was one of those quiet, life-altering moments that happen far from crowds or cameras, in empty car parks, in rain-soaked spaces where one person chooses heart over hesitation. Caitlin gently said her name, having learned Sarah's during their brief conversation, and told her firmly that she and Emma were not spending another night in that freezing vehicle. What followed was a blur of compassion and motion. Caitlin brought them to her own flat rather than simply buying them a hotel room, setting them up in her guest room with clean clothes, warm food, fresh bedding, baby supplies, and a crib she had delivered within hours. And her support did not end there. Over the next days, she helped Sarah navigate the maze of social, temporary housing assistance, access medical care for herself and Emma, and begin planning the completion of her degree through online courses. For the first time in months, Sarah felt not only safe but seen, supported by someone who believed in her long before she relearned how to believe in herself. Within weeks, Sarah secured stable accommodation through a single mother program, found a part-time job with flexible hours, and enrolled in the final courses needed to complete her degree. Emma, now warm, nourished, and secure, began to flourish, her tiny personality blossoming in ways impossible during those